were created in Southeast Asia. We come mainly from anthropology. For panelists, there's a cross interest between anthropology and history. So the first two papers are more historical. The second one's about the contemporary. And as I said, the interest is how states were actually created in different practices and different shapes and forms in in various places in the highlands of Southeast Asia. Martian Xiong and Oliver Tappe are going to speak about various different histories of that. And Guido Sprenger and me, we're going to talk about something that is closer to the contemporary. And as anthropologists, we work very closely with kind of actual little practices, such as going to church, monks, mining, rebel songs, and how all these things, what they have to do with state formation. Let's listen to the first paper, Martian Xiong.
Thanks to organize this panel. I think my paper is just give a certain background, historical background about how these styles of states in the transformation stages. In Chinese side was the transformation from Ming to Qing. In Burmese side was the transformation from Tonggu dynasty to Khumban dynasty. And on this borderland, scholars always ignore the significant influence of silver mine. So silver mine performed an important role for the competition for both sides. And it was the reason why the Burmese occupied this mine area, and then the Qing government, during the Qianlong period, launched the war between Qing and Burma to take over those silver mines. Easily, those important elements were ignored. So I think it's important to review this and then to understand that material facts like silver mine perform important role in the transformation of the states. This region is, I think, most area in this borderland, in the southern Burma and Yunnan borderland, was a region for the silver mines. And some of them, of those mines, will also get a mixture of copper mine. And this research reviews the history of exploitation of silver mine on the borderland between the Yunnan and Burma frontier, as well as study the social organization of miners and influence of miner society on this borderland during the transformation to both sides. And from, especially from late Ming, especially as late as in the 1720s, the Qing government launched a new policy, allowed more and more people to work on the copper mine. But silver mine is open because the Qing government cannot control the silver production, because silver can be directly used as money, the currency, it's a market. So after a century of exploitation, resulting the silver mines become exhausted from 18th century to 1840s in the Daoguan period or Jiaqing period in Middle Qing. A large number of unemployed miners had to search for outlets other than mining deep in the mountains. That means those people moved from the mine fields to the neighboring mountains area to mobilize mountain people into a new political system. So some separate miners found political interest with Lahu or the Lohe, it was called Lohe, through the participation in Lohe's rebelling Five Buddha District social movement, which was based on the tradition of secret society in the mines. In this political and social mobilization movement, the miners adopted the social organizational method, like secret society style, and technique, like the technique to make weapons, into the reconstructed society in the frontier mountains area, which create a new the movement create a new Lagu identity. And other, those separate miners mobilize and become involved into the competition and violent conflict in other silver mines, especially, and copper mines. And also in some cities along the main transportation routes in Western Yunnan, especially in Yongzhang and Dali, along the important route. So in some cities, along the transportation routes, a lot of social chaos followed to become a new movement of Hui rebellion. Along with more and more serious conflict among miners, an ethnic mobilization line between the Hui miners and Han miners were gradually established, which result in more and more ethnic violence between the Han and the Hui or Pantai, Bande in these transportation cities and villages. So the resulting ethnic conflict create escalation in ethnic violence that eventually to genocide in 1870s. So the decline of the silver mine industry on the borderland during the 18th century, 1800 to 1840s brought about the local government failure to manage social mobility when miners shift into agricultural business. Therefore, ethnic mobilization bound with identity resistance become a political outlet. But this outlet differed depending on the different styles of local, political, and social landscape on Yunnan-Burma borderland was deeply reshaped, especially the mobilization of Lagu as a newly constructed identity and the clear line between the Bande, the Hui, and the Han were mobilized after the decline of especially the silver mine. So after 1730s, because the Qing China could not import copper from Japan for coin melting, and Yunnan became the most important province for copper production. However, silver mines in Yunnan also provide significant silver mining for the market, which occupied more than 10% of the silver consumed every year in China. So other part should be imported from South America to Europe. But the silver mine were mainly distributed in different territories on the border. That means on this broad area between Yunnan and Burma, without clear boundary. So Qing government carried out a special policy of lending loans to copper producers in advance for capital investment. Then the government purchased the molded copper to offset the loans. And this policy quickly stimulated the production of copper and then opened the silver mine for people. They didn't have any policy about how to control silver production. So the policy ignored about silver mines helped to develop a style of silver mine exploitation based on capital and the risk sharing principle. It also created a system relatively political autonomy among the silver miners. Help a higher profits and higher social cohesion of silver mines set the rules for fierce social conflict over mineral competition for miners in the remaining mines, where the silver mine were mainly exhausted after 1810s. Intensive social cohesion on the silver mines also set down rules for ethnic and political mobilization in exterior chieftains territorial and interior official counties. The two styles of mines therefore created two styles of identity resistance in counties or in the chieftains area due to the political geography of borderlands between interior counties and exterior chieftains on the border. So the two comparative styles of identity resistance between the Hui and the Lagu should be checked in different social and geographic spaces between interior counties and exterior chieftains territory on the border. So political boundaries between counties and chieftains also created a possible political space for the development of five Buddha polity in this geographic category of the Qing China state power. And this political movement also mobilized a large ethnic identity on the mountains in the chieftains area. Along with the collection of silver mines, competition over limited ore deposit become between minor bands shift a tendency to try to exclude Hui miners from those silver mines. So the local chieftains in the interior counties could not deal with serious conflict between miners' bands because the local government, local officers lacked of jurisdiction of the sentence in Qing law, so they have to send those arrested people from the mine area to capital Kunming. So the local state power had lost its validity in dealing with massive violence, along with more and more fierce killing between those bands. So the miners were not skillful or welcomed by agriculture, but their skills and experience of mining could enrich local militarization along transportation routes and cities. And a cycle therefore repeated itself. The mobility of miners and their competitions makes the government invalid, so that local communities had to be organized to protect themselves. Once again, the militarized communities tend to setting up ethnic boundaries between the Hui and the Han along the transportation routes and in the cities to exclude somebody relatively weak, and killing happened among each other, and these killings gradually developed to become genocide and during the rebellion of the Hui or Han time. The local political elites therefore led the foreigners to search for outlets of ethnic conflict to release anger they had accumulated through revenges. When the Qing state at the local level lost its social justice and authority of judicature, the society tended to use violence to redistribute power and resources, and then the Pandan rebellion happened. So this map shows those important, for example, silver mines here, and those areas were taken by the Gongban dynasty later. But it was controlled by the Ming chieftains, and the Gongban kings drove away those Shan chieftains to Yunnan. So we can see that there were many important silver mines here, the Munan, Shiliu, and Bolong, and Maolong, and Xi. All those silver mines were very significant in the production of silver in Qing dynasty. So we can see that those distribution of the silver mines on the borderland and this area were identified as the exterior chieftains area. And we can see the organization of miners on the mine. They practice certain way of autonomous based on the same hometown registration system, organized those miners along with the organization of the terminals. And then those band becomes a band of genocide on the silver mine, once the silver mine exhausted. And this area, we can find those historical tunnel is very small in the large scale of our view to say that by modern machine. And we can see the historical tunnels were just like a red hole. And we can still find those area in the silver mine where still the region for the offspring of miners who migrate from Jiangxi or Hunan province. And we can see the tunnel and the small piece of mineral and the temples, destroyed temples by Hunan miners. And those here is the ruin of a mosque by the Hui people, the the style we can find small tenements here. And the chieftain's officer. And another area of Monai, today's Nantan County on the border, and those silver mine area. And also very famous silver mine on today's La State area, running by certain Chinese forces. Thank you.
Maybe, do you want to stay here?
Yes,
we have about 5 minutes after every presentation for questions back, and then a whole discussion at the end. So, are there any questions to Professor Mark?
So, very interesting story. I just want to know how this ends. So, are you suggesting that people who adopted one style of resistance then joined the Chinese state, and the others joined the Burmese state?
We cannot say they are joining Chinese or Burmese because this area is very ambiguous. Thinking about identities of Chinese or Burmese, they are local groups.
But you're making a statement about state formation.
But the state formation is about the change of the state, reshaped people's identities. That means the state reform. For example, from Tonggu dynasty to Konban dynasty, the Konban kings occupied this silver mine area. This occupation creates a serious war, serious conflict between Konban and the Qing government. And then the Qing sent the army to occupy this region. So they are struggle for silver mine sometimes. So this kind of wars seriously reshaped people's relationship because wars make the Dai chieftain or San chieftains weak. And then those miners they find their space on the silver mines to develop a secret society. And then they have the geographic space to build up the Lahu style of rebelling political system. But this system is also follow a tradition of Chinese secret society, because the transformation from the Ming to Qing, a lot of people for political Ming refugee escaped from Qing from inner provinces to Burma, and then they become important scholars to develop their theory to support secret society. They want to pull down the Qing dynasty, to resume the Ming dynasty. So those kind of conflicts is so hard to say whether they are follow the Chinese or non-Chinese. They were migrants. They have clear identity as miners, but I don't think they have very clear identity of Chinese. But later, based on those mobilizations, they developed their clear identity as Hui people or the Lahu people. So I think cases. The cases showing the transformation of the state create certain political system or political movement to mobilize more and more ethnic identities. So I think this assume is different from what Zomi are talking about. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you, very interesting. And this connects with a lot of the history that's been done of natural resources, right? Certain natural resource regimes make for social organization.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I don't usually think of this kind of mining as being, as feeding into mass social organization, right? We think of prospectors as being largely individualists. What was it about the nature of mining here that required that many people? You know, usually you can do this sort of artisanal mining with just a few people, right?
Not a few. A single. It's a very complex system. A single silver mine should be supported by about middle size, about 100,000 people. Thinking about the caravan, supply, logistic, You have to move rice, vegetable, coal in. You have to maintain the transportation system. You have to dig. You divided the miners into 3 groups of people work day and night. And you divided those miners into the melting oil workers, digging workers, transportation workers. So it's very complex. Based on the historical records, there are certain opera groups there, there are prostitutions there are stores here. It's very complex. So imagine a modern factory.
Yeah.
It's the same.
The interesting thing is that we've got plenty of other artisanal mines around the world that don't bring all that complexity to the mining site, that would leave that at the provincial capital, and all they do is extract, rocks or ore at the mining site. So what made them get that many people at the mining site for social organization?
It's very long process that if somebody finds there's a silver mine, they have to report to the government to ask for the license. And once they get the license, they quickly separated the posts along the most important transportation routes. For example, in Zhengyue, which is a gate between Yunnan and between Guizhou and Hunan province. Once people want to go to this region, they have to study those posts to find where you can find a job. And another system is the same home information or same home network. You can send information to your relatives and friends, and then the workers, migrant workers, come like today's Chinese workers in Burma, perform the same way, come from same place, come from same village, organize it. So they have a certain system for information, for transportation. Yeah. So I think it's very interesting, but I think it's a chapter about the movement of people. Yeah, and also about the increasing of Chinese population during certain centuries, and then they can absorb more and more workers in the mountains. Yeah.
This problem seems to be natural resource has linked to mobilization and leading to genocide in the end.
Yeah.
What do you think that could have stopped this process to
I
lead
think
to genocide?
if we study the history, it's no way. Because there are two types of ethnic mobilization. One side is those separatist miners moved from mine to nearby mountains to become Langu people. So they organize a new system, like 5 Buddha system, like a small kingdom. Somebody perform Buddha, and his son will follow the Buddha, that's Dalai Lama system. And this system maintains for a century. Some people, they cannot find resources at local society. Maybe they want to search for more resources in another mine or copper mine or silver mine, so they moved. So for those people who moved to another mine, more and more people got involved into the competition between the exhausted minerals. So genocide happened in that war. The Qing government, the officers have to follow the law. That means the local county officers cannot judge killing cases. So they have to arrest those killers and then send those killers to the capital, Kunming. And because the distance, they have to walk a month or more than 1 month. So because the long distance, because the very difficult condition for transportation, those people, once sent to the capital, provincial capital, if they deny, they have to send back. So the problem is that the local or income cannot support those law cases. So what the local officers did is that they don't want to stop them. They just ask them to kill. And then once the cases of killing become genocide, and then they can call military action from the government to send a troop to press those rebelling. So the rebellion was created by the Qing government. And as I said, the problem is that the Qing government was they don't have the ability to deal with those complex legal cases based on the law, because they don't know how to control more and more separate population. Yeah, I think this is another way to think about the Qing state, because they lost the ability.
Yeah. Thanks. Maybe can we move on, and we have a discussion at the end of the three presentations. So the next one is Oliver Tappe.
Okay, thanks Hans for organizing this panel. Hello everyone. Today I would like to take you to upland Laos, province of Hua-Pan. Actually, a region of Laos where the Lao are one ethnic group among many. And in general, the Lao constitute only half of the population of Laos, so it's maybe one of the most heterogeneous countries in the world. My topic is state formation. This slide. There's something wrong with the. Oh, one time did it on Mac, so. Anyway, maybe I'll fix it later.
If you hit F5.
I'm not used to Microsoft anymore.
Just on F5 should do it.
F5 on the keyboard.
Yeah, I was looking for the keyboard. Sorry. Okay, the title of my presentation is Frontier Mimesis, State Penetration and Local Appropriation in the Lao-Vietnamese Borderlands. So I took the idea of forward by Hans, state formation, how did it happen? My topic is state formation under French colonialism in upland, in the uplands of Laos and Vietnam, basically. Hua-Pan, today a province in northeastern Laos, was historically a contested upland frontier between the lowland kingdoms of Vietnamese in the east and the Siamese and Lao ones in the west. With a dozen different ethnic groups, local power hierarchies, and complex processes of cultural interpenetration, this region provides an illustrative case study for questions of modern state formation in the Southeast Asian uplands. I am particularly interested in how local people perceived and negotiated different external influences, such as the emergent French colonial administration at the turn of the 20th century. Even if the reach of the state remained selective and fragmentary, its manifold interventions in local socio-political and economic configurations entailed gradual transformations and sometimes violent responses. However, I will try to avoid the domination-resistance binary that was put forward by James Scott in his Art of Not Being Governed. Since the late 19th century, the French colonial administration adopted various strategies to pacify and control this spontaneous, culturally heterogeneous region. At the same time, upland power brokers aimed to forge strategic alliances with the new colonial power. This entailed shifts in local socio-political configurations and new economic and cultural dynamics. My approach to analyze the various entanglements in this upland frontier region is a kind of historical anthropology, and I would like to introduce two concepts of my analytical toolkit, that is mimesis and infrastructures. Infrastructures arguably the materiality of state penetration. The concept of mimesis is perhaps more interesting. Mimesis is first of all a way to create relations, and second, mimetic processes characterize the trajectories and contingencies of these relations. Agents of mimetic appropriation aim to establish mutually beneficial relations. Mimesis here functions as a tactic to shape, to control, or at least to negotiate these relations. However, if state actors and state subjects constitute the opposing poles in such mimetic relations, their respective aims and interests might collide. So, how are such inherent power asymmetries perceived and negotiated by the respective actors? This question is particularly acute in a colonial context where increased state control of the mountainous frontier regions and the introduction of new infrastructures, for example, roads, border regimes, trade regulations, fundamentally altered upland-lowland relations. French colonial rule aggravated the process of administrative transformations and rationalization of governance already triggered in 19th century Vietnam and Siam, and in their respective upland fringes. Most studies on mimesis focus on the subversive agency of subaltern peoples facing hegemonic colonial powers. However, mimetic strategies can also be observed with dominant actors such as the colonial state representatives. As documents from the colonial archives illustrate, French administrators in the Lao Vietnamese uplands adopted various strategies to co-opt local elites in order to make frontier administration more cost-efficient. The precarious interplay of indigenous and colonial interests emblematized the hierarchized social space in the upland-lowland continuum within mainland Southeast Asia. Mimetic strategies of mutual appropriation shaped the interdependent relationship, at least in the formative years of French colonial rule, between colonizers and colonized. This kind of gamble within the colonial encounter implies mimetic processes that Michael Taussig once summarized as exploring difference and becoming other, a dialectical politics of identity and alterity marked by a shifting interplay of identity and difference, proximity and distance. However, as my small case studies will show, the colonial encounters of the late 19th century definitely initiated processes of socio-political transformation within the apparent longue durée of upland-lowland action. So, I'll give it a try with the next slide. I'm not sure. There's something wrong with this slide. But anyway, you don't see the caption, but this is a Chinese trader and two women of the Hmong ethnic minority. And maybe I give it a try to here you see that how it should look like. Actually, two pictures. This maybe you see this here is a woman of the upland Thai group, and here is sitting a Khmu of the Hmong Khmer language family. And they are put by the French photographer in a kind of hierarchized relation that reflected the dominance of the Thai-speaking groups, like the Lao and other Thai-speaking groups, and the Hmong Khmer-speaking groups that were called Kha, slave or serf. Okay, first case study. In 1896, Jean-Gustave Montperrat became head of the commissariat in Japan and soon forged close alliances with Lao notables. 1 year after his move to Wuhan, Montperrat reported about a fête du sermon that he had organized on the occasion of Lao New Year to foster the unity of Wuhan and to underpin French authority. Montperrat had summoned notables from the Buddhist Lao towns for the oath of allegiance, ritually enacted by sprinkling water, as in many Buddhist purification rites. Most of them were Lao linked to the court of Luang Prabang, where the French had already established a loyal protectorate. And actually the French picked the local Lao elites as they say you are the boss here now, and they get the privileges for tax for taxation and labor requisition, things like that the Lao exploited later. This ceremony appears as a décollage of European and indigenous practices of political ritual. It started with a military parade of the Garde Indigène, the local troops. After that, Montpellier handed over certificates of appointment and letters of honor to certain Lao Paya lords, local rulers, a common practice in Southeast Asia. This element implies official recognition of local authority by an external power, with the French commissar having replaced the Siamese and Lao kings. Montpellier regretted that the medals intended for this occasion did not arrive on time, because of the, quote, excellent effect this would have made. The French commissar was aware of the efficacy of combining indigenous and foreign elements of political ritual. Indeed, the Lao notables eagerly adopted certain elements of Western governments and took advantage of some privileges, such as the right to collect taxes for the French, to the expense of other upland people, such as the Khmu. So these ethnic hierarchies were aggravated by the French. It is evident here, back to the topic of mimesis, that mimesis goes beyond mere copying or imitation. Inspired by Michael Tausig's paired contrasting of mimesis with authority, Ian Walker interprets mimetic practice as, quote, appropriation of the other and the power of the other as part of a process of social change, unquote. In the context of colonial encounters before the establishment of a pervasive colonial state apparatus, this process of mimesis was a reciprocal one, characterized by mutual appropriation and adaptation. But of course, such mimetic interactions also implied misunderstandings, since they are often based on the very cultural representations that the different actors have of each other. Different images and ideas, different expectations and desires. And I will illustrate this with an event from 1914, when Samneur, the capital of Huapan province, was attacked by a small band of 32 Chinese and 40 Lao and Thai, who killed the French commissar and took a large amount of opium and silver with them. This attack was a response to some of the new infrastructures, by means of which the French economically penetrated the uplands, in particular the opium monopoly. Chinese traders were pushed aside when the French urged opium producers, such as the Hmong, to sell their harvest directly to the colonial authorities. Not surprisingly, this event appears in the French colonial sources as an example of Chinese banditry, so Chinese bandits stealing opium from the French. However, the participation of some Lao is critical here. A certain Bapom, former headman of the small town of Singapore, actively collaborated with the Chinese and provided arms provision and information. He was removed from office by the French before because of some opium deals with the Chinese and for abuse of his privilege to collect taxes. The French just picked another headman and thus directly intervened in local power struggles between influential Lao families. The revolt was later quelled with the help of Vietnamese soldiers, followed by an increased establishment of military posts. The maintenance of these posts, based on the exploitation of Khmu labor, they were called coolies. This exploitation was organized by privileged Lao families that had demonstrated their loyalty to the French. Years later, the Vietnamese communists took advantage of such aggravated local power asymmetries to spread the message of the evil feudalists and imperialists. To conclude, my aim is to investigate specific social actors, practices, and relations in specific historical situations. In the case of the emerging colonial state in upland China, we see a wide range of strategies between resistance and compliance, different conceptions of sovereignty, a complex interplay of mimetic appropriation and adaptation. In many respects, the colonial penetration of the uplands was a failure, but it definitely provided the bureaucratic and infrastructural ground for the later nation states of Laos and Vietnam. for the discussion, I would like to suggest an alternative to the term penetration, namely Edmund Leach's concept of cultural interpenetration. It is perhaps more useful to explain the two directions and dynamics of the colonial encounter, as exemplified by the thematic entanglements between the different actors, including the French. Thank you.
Any questions? Well, I cannot can you elaborate on your concept or how you're using Torsi's idea of mimesis and why this is better than other concepts? You say interpenetration, interaction, acculturation.
Well, I kind of started to toy around with this concept some years ago when we had a workshop on multi-ethnic societies and how different ethnic groups interact, or how the dominant ethnic majority, such as the Lao and Laos, interact with ethnic minorities. And what I found interesting, if you think about the encounters in the uplands between a few French officials, sometimes there were only like 2 Frenchmen in a huge upland province, and what happened in this encounter, how the French interacted with Lao notables, how they perceived each other, and then mimesis was for me an interesting approach because according to the colonial sources, the French really tried to understand local forms of governance, and we're discussing how can we use specific elements of indigenous governance. And some of them also then adopted some styles and strategies of governance. On the other hand, the Lao looked, what are these guys and how can we take advantage of the French? Not that, they're foreigners or strangers or colonizers, but they were just another new player, sort of. And so they also kind of adapted, sort of, try to emulate practices of the French, and in this interplay was exactly the thing that was interesting for me, to get a different idea of colonialism, so to say, on the grassroots level somewhere in the mountains, or just an aspect of colonialism in China. And of course, we all read James Scott's book, The Art of Not Being Governed, and this kind of historical ethnographic material challenges some of his sometimes simplifications of the rebellious uplander and the exploitative state. So there are some people like the Lao in the uplands or other Thai-speaking group that cannot be categorized in the colonizer-colonized binary or uplander lowland, and so it's more complex. And so this approach appeared to be more useful.
Would you say you could categorize it in a clash of state systems, as in the more traditional, in the origin, mandala system, which originated from India, and it gives this center-periphery approach to the whole thing, confronted with the aggressive Westphalian system, which the French obviously had to import here, and they were used to it, and these two systems being incompatible generally.
No, that's a really important point, and this is what happened in this encounter as well. French had this Westphalian system in mind, but some of them, there were a lot of debates within the French administration and discussions, and there were some that said we should understand the local, they didn't call it mandala system, but that we use the local ways. So, and like also using this rituals. So they were this kind of gray zones in between. of course, in the end of the day, the nation-state concept was stronger, sort of, also today. But still today in Laos, you can, maybe Guido will talk about the elements of the old mandala system. It's still there, a certain layer in everyday political interaction. And so this is still an issue even today, not only in colonial times when there was this kind of clash of different systems. But how these interactions and negotiations of these two systems is important for my research as well. It's an important point.
Okay, thanks a lot. The next one is Guido Brenner.
Okay, thank you very much, Hans, for setting up this interesting panel. And we all seem to look at the state not as most historians would do, like there was an origin and then it started to spread, so with a view from the center, but rather with a view from the periphery. How does this state appear on the horizon of local populations? And what kind of meaning does it acquire here? And I'm doing this once again in relationship to Laos, and in regard to the question, how does Buddhism relate to the state from the point of view of a population that is part animist, as you want to say, and part half-half. So there are people who already identify as Buddhists and others who don't. And to start with an anecdote that occurred about 3 weeks ago during my recent fieldwork research in a village where most of the people would say, well, we are doing satsana pi, we are doing spirit religion. And these people would mostly do rituals related to ancestors, rituals related to territorial spirits, but they have adopted a few Lao rituals in the past 10, 15 years. Now I asked one of them about his religious affiliation, and he said, well, we are here doing mostly animism, mostly satsana pi, but a little bit Buddhism as well. And then I asked, and how did you register in the census? Because there had been a national census in 2015. And he said, well, I registered as a Buddhist because that's for the government. So I want to take this as a start to speak about relationships between religion and the state in Laos, which, as you know, is a socialist country, so not supposed to be kind of religious state. And the point of view of the non-Buddhists. After all, as Oliver has mentioned, only about 50% of the population of Laos are now registered as Lao, and about 70% are registered as Buddhist. So there are some minorities which are also Buddhist. But this still leaves 30% which are classified as satsana pi, which is not really a satsana, which is not really religion. You can't say that animism is a religion, and the census document very explicitly says that animism is not a religion. So these people have no religion, but you still ask them what kind of religion they have. I don't have the results of this particular question for the 2015 census, but I assume that it must be much more than 70% of Buddhists, for reasons that will become quite transparent rather soon. So what I'm going to talk about is first, about religion and the state in Laos. Then I'm talking about the Ju, which is a Mon Khmer-speaking group on the Boloven Plateau. They're also called Loven. Then I'm talking briefly about the animist village, the Satsanapi village I just mentioned, which is called Laksipa. And then I'm going to another village where people would say, well, we are doing two religions, Satsanaput, which is Buddhism, and Satsanapi, which is spirit religion, which is very odd because officially and especially from a Buddhist point of view, there is no Satsanapi. It's not religion, but they say it anyway. And at the end, I want to answer two questions, or approach two questions. First, why would people be attracted to Buddhism in the first place? I think that very much of the literature on that is still somewhat inflected by the idea that Buddhism is somehow superior, and that's why people are attracted to it. And that's, of course, nonsense. They must have good reasons to connect to Buddhism. What is that kind of connection doing for them? And secondly, what does it do to these ancestral beings, to these spirits, which are embedded into a different set of relationships in the Satsanapi context and in the Buddhist context? Of course, the relationship between a major world religion on the one hand and spirit religions on the other, or relationships with spirits, that is of course a major theme of the study of religion in Southeast Asia. So that they coexist is not particularly special. But however, I think that this particular case gives us particular insight, especially around the question, what is the role of the state here? Okay, let's first look at Laos and religion in Laos. Now, the interesting thing is that, of course, in the past, in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century, or beginning of the 14th century, Laos was a region dominated by Buddhist kingdoms. And these Buddhist kingdoms had significant peripheries of non-Buddhist people. And in contrast to Thailand, where we don't have that kind of relationship, the relationship between the Buddhist centers and the non-Buddhist peripheries was considered to be one of the most important relationships for the constitution of these polities. So the non-Buddhists in the periphery were actually the original owners of the land, and they had to be recognized ritually in annual rituals. So that was a very important relationship. On the other hand, of course, it was a Buddhist dominated polity, and Laos went through different historical phases. I'm not going to detail that, but what is interesting is that when, starting in the late 19th century, Laos became a colonial state, became a colony of the French, the process of transforming these galactic polities into modern territorial states set in, and that was connected with the search for an institution that would transport all these new administrative and ideological ideas down to the village level, which was not the case during the mandala, the galactic polity states. And the only institution available was the Sangha, was the Buddhist monkhood. So, and this happened quite similarly in places which were dominated by the French, like Laos, in Myanmar, and also in Thailand, which was not a colony after all. But you always would find similar processes where the monkhood was being organized along similar lines like the state administrative structures, so they were parallel. It happened in Laos in 1959. And then later, after this revitalization and the reorganization of the Sangha got co-opted into state projects like development, spread of nationalist ideology, and so on. And interestingly, this continued in Laos even after the socialist revolution of 1975. So other than in Cambodia, where the communists tried to radically suppress Buddhism, the Lao leaders of the revolution always tried to co-opt Buddhism into their project, and stressing that socialism and Buddhism was basically the same kind of thing, and it was based on community of compassion, and it was there to alleviate suffering and all this kind of things. And of course, lots of monks left the country, monks which were associated with the previous elites and with the kingdom, but still the major revolutionary leaders actually got, when they died in the late 80s and early 90s, they got full-scale Buddhist cremation rituals. So they were completely integrated into Buddhist ritualism. Now this plays a particular problem for Laos because part of the revolution worked only because of the support of the upland minorities, and most of them were not Buddhist. So in a way, when Laos became a socialist country, on the one hand there was this promise to treat all these ethnic minorities equally, but then there was an increasing tendency to reform the state in the shape of a Buddhist kingdom, and somehow the current political elite slipped into the shoes of the kings as the protectors of the Sangha. And Buddhism became a major way to spread the presence of the state in certain areas. So I'm looking now at what's happening in this little quadrangle in the south of Laos. This is where I'm currently doing field work. Paxe is the biggest town in southern Laos. This is the Bulaven Plateau, a high plateau that used to be populated by Mon Khmer-speaking minorities. And we have two villages here, Laksipa, which is where people say that, come on, go away. Where people would say, we are doing Satsanapi, and they are well known for that in the area, that they have this classical, that they still have the old rituals. And Khoisan, where people say we are doing two religions, Buddhism and spirit religion. Now, one of the important factors in this entire dynamics is coffee. Well, the Bulaven Plateau is well known for its coffee. It's supposed to be very delicious. Strangely enough, I'm working there, but I don't drink coffee. And this has basically replaced Swidden agriculture in the course of the past century quite slowly, but now you find only very little Swidden agriculture. What is important is that this is very successful, and it made peasants much more wealthy than most of Lao peasants are, which drew a lot of Lao families, especially Lao husbands, to the plateau where they married into Jeru families, and this is also one reason, they say, why Buddhism arrived there. On the other hand, so we have here, this is one of the strongest proponents of the idea that the Jew should be adherents of Satsanapi, of spirit religion, the rituals expert of this village, Laksipa. And the ritual system of that village is based upon the idea that within houses you can venerate the ancestors only of either the wife's side or the husband's side. So you cannot do rituals for both of them inside the house. Usually the ancestors are on the wife's side, so it's a kind of matrilineal ancestral relationship. And if the husband has to do rituals for his ancestors, he has to do it outside, on the ground. And what is happening here is that you have these little windows where you push out food for the ancestors. And then while everybody is drinking from these clay jars, which is actually quite delicious. This is connected to the graveyards, where you have similar houses, but just for the dead. But they also have these little windows. And they also have this orientation toward one side of the